Thank you for tuning in to the Simple Sophisticate podcast, the show that is part of the Simply Luxurious Life online destination. Visit the blog, thesimplyluxuriouslife.com, to find the show notes for each podcast episode, as well as much more weekly content to elevate your everyday and deepen your contentment. From recipes, motivational posts, videos of the cooking show series, style and decor inspiration, French and British inspired content, and the reader's favorite regular weekly post, This and That, which goes live on the blog every Friday. Now to today's episode. Welcome to the Simple Sophisticate podcast, where intelligent living is paired with signature style. I'm your host, Shannon Ables. And whether you're listening on your commute, exercising, working in the garden, or sitting down with a hot cup of tea or a café au lait, thank you for tuning in. Let's get started. Welcome to the 307th episode of The Simple Sophisticate. Today we're going to talk about the extremely powerful benefit of being truly who you are and sharing that with the world. Today's episode is entirely inspired by a book I read in April. I've been patiently waiting, but also glad that there's been some time for me to really let these ideas percolate to bring this episode to you today. This book is written by Martha Beck, and it was released in April 2021, titled The Way of Integrity, Finding the Path to Your True Self. And I've talked a little bit about this briefly back in April and This and That, and then again in a little bit more detail in May's A Couple Moments with the top tier subscribers. Since then, I've read the entire book. I've gone back through it and reread a few different parts over and over again. And it inspired today's episode, which is broken down into 3 parts. Number 1, how do you recognize or know that your life is not in alignment with your true integrity or your true self? What do you do about that? How do you get back on track or get on track? And then what are the benefits? So we're going to break it down in those 3 different ways. And this week's petit plaisir is one, again, I've been patiently waiting to share with you, but it's just in time for what I think you're going to potentially enjoy this upcoming weekend, if you're interested and if you're a Francophile. All right, so enough of those teases. Let's get into today's episode. I want to begin with a quote that actually came from an interview with Martha Beck on Marie Forleo's podcast. And the quote is simple but true. Here we go. Your life will tell you the truth. End quote. What does that mean? Let's get into this. Divided, compartmentalized, unable to give what is needed, not by choice, but by pure, sincere inability due to time and energy. Martha Beck explains in her new book, The Way of Integrity, that the word integrity originates from the Latin integer, meaning intact, and therefore cements the definition of integrity as being to be one thing, whole and undivided. When we are not living a life of integrity, we are not being true to ourselves, nor the world. Now, you might be thinking about the general and more commonly known definition of integrity, to live by one's values or to abide by morals society applauds. But that is not what Beck writes about in her book. Instead, yes, she's still talking about integrity, but she's looking at it through the true meaning of the word and applies it to each of us individually. So a life of integrity is one when you have aligned your body, mind, heart, and soul, and so therefore your actions, your mental strength, your true self, you are set free. In the introduction of her book, she uses a phrase commonly known on this blog or podcast, that you will achieve a sustainable joie de vivre. I love it. She refers to French a couple different times throughout this book, but she states, quote, "You may not believe that such a fulfilling life is possible. It is. Beck states this with calm, assured confidence and goes on throughout the rest of the book, speaking from her own incredibly challenging and terrifying and finally liberating life journey, that indeed what she shares, what she writes about, is true. Here's a quote to ponder. No matter how far you think you've strayed from your true path, the moment you say, I'm going to trust myself, I'm going to follow my truth, the healing begins. Now, all the quotes I'm going to share today are going to come from Martha Beck, primarily from her book, and some, as this last one and the first one that began today's episode, is from that interview with Marie Forleo. Beck's book crossed my path just after I had officially and publicly announced a resolve to live my own life of integrity, as I had just turned in March my resignation papers concluding a 20-year career in teaching public education at the secondary level. Now, I've shared throughout this past spring that I was going to share with you, the listeners of this podcast, what my news was that I've been kind of wrestling with, not necessarily wrestling with, like fighting with, but just making sure that I was where I needed to be in my own mind and figuring out how to convey that to you, the listeners. So yes, I turned in my resignation papers in March, and I will be concluding my teaching career here in a couple of weeks, here in June. And I arrived at my decision after more than a few years of hemming and hawing about such a choice being necessary for me to live fully in alignment with what I knew to be true in my heart of hearts. And as I shared in my May episode of the video series for top tier subscribers, A Cup of Moments, it wasn't about running away from something. It was about running towards something that I loved even more. And what I mean by that is something that I'll make more clear here as we walk through some of these steps. But if you want to know more intimately why I made this decision, please watch the May episode of A Cup of Moments, and you can learn about how to become a top tier subscriber. It enables you to enjoy the entire blog ad-free every single time. And you can read as many posts and watch as many episodes as you want without limitation. Another way of looking at the way of integrity is much like putting together a puzzle. It can be especially hard to rationalize why we should leave something when on paper, this thing that we're leaving to onlookers seems beautiful, that it's humming along wonderfully. And so it wouldn't make sense for us to leave something so good, whether it's our workplace job or a relationship. But if the puzzle doesn't allow your nature, so who you innately are, to be nurtured, as Beck describes, when you are, quote, rushing to conform, often ignoring or overruling your genuine feelings, even intense ones like longing or anguish, to please your culture, you've divided yourself. You aren't in your integrity, one thing, but in duplicity, two things, end quote. In other words, the puzzle isn't your puzzle to be a part of. Having the courage to step away from something that works on paper and works for other people, even if we languish while others shine, is not living a life of integrity. Quote, when you pursue a career that pulls you away from your true self, your talent and enthusiasm will quit on you like a bored intern, end quote. The question we need to ask ourselves is, does the culture nurture your nature? Just pause for a second before answering this question, because I would have answered yes a couple of years ago. Partly because I was so busy and so full trying to maintain both of these careers I loved for different reasons. It wasn't until upon reflection, when more truths were revealed and the pandemic really gave me a truth to see, that when I read her book just this last April, my answer of whether or not I should leave teaching, of whether or not I can just focus on my writing, I really was not being nurtured in the culture that I was in when it came to teaching. And that's where I struggled, because how can someone want to leave teaching? And I'll talk a bit more later today in this episode as to why this was such a struggle. So let's look into the first part of our conversation. How do you know if you are not in your integrity? In other words, how do you know if you are out of your integrity? Number one, your life goes pear-shaped. That's a quote from her book. I love that description, but it's because I think it's just so visual and apt. Beck reveals how our inability to communicate civilly, snapping at people we love, or letting ourselves be distracted regularly by rabbit holes on the internet, for example, or on the health side, your quote, immune system and muscles become weakened. Emotionally, you're feeling grumpy, sad, or numb, end quote. Your focus and clarity, that they're difficult to maintain, and sickness is more frequent and energy is depleted. All of these symptoms, and I put that in air quotes, are red flags that your life is out of integrity. But I want to end this first point, on some good news. Quote, integrity is the cure to unhappiness. Period. End quote. So that's number one. Your life goes pear-shaped. That should be a red flag that you're out of your integrity. Number two, living a life governed by the shoulds and supposed to expectations. Living simply luxuriously, at its core, is built upon questioning society, putting into practice critical thinking skills, and thereby thinking well. When we think well, removing our biases and acknowledging the short-sightedness as well as true motivations of the culture we live in, we can think clearly and free ourselves from the pressures and guilt placed upon us to live a certain way. Even if our way seems simple compared to significant societal differences, such as announcing you're an atheist in a family full of devout believers of any one religious institutional faith. Acknowledging your truth regarding your gender, even if your family or friends cannot understand your truth. Or standing up for a political issue which forces your family to confront their long-held unconscious biases. Your way of integrity needs to be honored to set yourself free, no matter how small or significant it may appear in your mind's eye. If you're not living your truth, you're not living in the way of integrity. Beck writes in detail about her own breaking free from the shoulds when she writes about her stepping away from Mormonism, upon doing so receiving death threats, sharing with the world and her husband that she is gay, and choosing to keep her child, who she knew to have Down syndrome before she gave birth, even though at the time people she respected in her field of study urged her not to. And I want to just preface that by saying in her interview with Marie Forleo, she explicitly states while that was her choice, she honors women to have a choice, which I think is important to keep in mind as part of her decision. And I love how she explains that decision in the book, but also in the conversation. In great emotional detail, yet step-by-step detail, all three of these are shared as to how she made it to the other side, and because each decision was her truth, she set herself free. She stopped living the life she was supposed to and stepped courageously into a life of integrity. So that's number two. You know your life is not in the way of integrity when you're living a life governed by shoulds and supposed to expectations. Number three, there are emotional struggles. Quote, whenever you lose your integrity, you'll feel your own unique brew of bad moods. Depending on your personality, it could be anxiety and depression, or free-floating hostility, itching to punch everyone in your office, family, zip code, etc., or full-on panic attacks, especially during special occasions you would assume or think you would want to thoroughly enjoy and would enjoy, end quote. For me, leaving teaching felt culturally wrong, and I put that in air quotes. What I mean by that is teaching and being a teacher is held in high regard, and as in my bias, yet as much as it is not my bias mind thinking here, it should be. Teaching is valuable to a civil society. So leaving a profession which society holds in esteem, high esteem, felt to already be making the wrong decision. However, as Beck calls them, my wild beasts of bad moods would arise in the weirdest of times. I knew something was not in alignment, but nearly all of my acquaintances, friends, and even my mother were or are teachers. So how do you have a conversation with them about leaving a profession they are already in and most sincerely love and have found their calling? In my case, you don't. You just keep teaching. So that's number 3, emotional struggles where they don't make sense, but not only they might make sense, but they just happen so frequently, and it makes life really difficult to maneuver through. But you feel like you have to go this way, like this is the struggle you're meant to take. No, you don't have to. And how liberating that is to understand that. Number 4, bad habits, can't break them. The bad habits could be an onslaught of a variety of behaviors, ranging from less harmful to incredibly life-destructive. But anything which does not constructively add to your life and the quality of your days is a bad habit. Whether financial expenditures, drinking or eating habits, relationship failure after failure because you refuse to have the ability to either see or change what needs to be addressed, such habits stay with us because, quote, when you're feeling fundamentally lost, afflicted by purposelessness, foul moods, and bad jobs, anything that stimulates the brain's pleasure centers can become an addiction. End quote. I can say, thankfully, I had a positive outlet for my lack of finding purpose or fully being fulfilled by teaching. It was blogging, which then turned into podcasting, which turned into cooking, which became my pleasure and purpose. And I am incredibly grateful that I honored my curiosity to explore what this blogging thing was all the way back in 2009. I don't think we all have to have horrible habits so much so it becomes painfully obvious to outsiders that we are not on the right path for our life in order to live a life of true integrity. But what I appreciate about Beck's book is bringing to our attention habits which, if we are being honest with ourselves, aren't helping us to live a life we sincerely love living. But we keep engaging in these said habits because we need the pleasure, we need something to feel good, because so much doesn't, and we don't know or don't have the courage yet to step off the path that isn't ours to walk upon. That's number 4, when you have bad habits and you cannot break them. So those are the signs to take notice of. Now, before we get into the second section, the ways to get back on the path of integrity, I want to introduce you to 2 sponsors. I'll be right back. Is there anything that's interfering with your happiness? Is something preventing you from achieving your goals? BetterHelp will assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist. And you can connect in a safe and private online environment that is also convenient. BetterHelp is not a crisis line. It is not self-help. It is professional counseling done securely online. And BetterHelp is committed to facilitating great therapeutic matches so they make it easy and free to change counselors if needed. The service is available for clients worldwide, and licensed professional counselors are specialized in a variety of areas such as depression, stress, anxiety, relationships, self-esteem, LGBT matters, family conflicts, anger, grief, and many others. And everything you share is confidential. So many people have been using BetterHelp that they are recruiting additional counselors in all 50 states. And as a Simple Sophisticate listener, you'll get 10% off your first month by visiting the show's sponsor at betterhelp.com/simple. Join over 1 million people who have taken charge of their mental health. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/simple. The Simple Sophisticate is also sponsored by Graf Lance. You may remember that I spoke about how I've been enjoying wearing Graf Lance's face masks while I've been teaching, and I have continued to wear them as I've taught. Very comfortable, very soft and gentle on the skin, and they create space for my mouth and my nose comfortably. Well, did you know that they also have Merino wool felt pieces? I have been enjoying them since they sent them to me recently, and it is their Merino wool felt coasters and Trivets that are impressive with regards to their functionality and ability to protect my antique and vintage finds around the home. These felt coasters and Trivets create a barrier for your table because they both repel and absorb water. They're stain resistant, highly absorbing, heat resistant, non-toxic, super luxurious, and very durable. Oh, and it is one of the most sustainable fibers as well, which of course is one of the tenets of Grafflance, not to mention being made in Los Angeles by a small team. Grafflance has a lot of other sustainable home goods, as well as their New York Times approved mask, which I just mentioned, that I'm still wearing and enjoying. And as a Simple Sophisticate listener, you have the opportunity to take 20% off. Visit their website, grafflance.com. That's GRAF-LANTZ.com, and use the promo code SIMPLE20 to take 20% off your order through June 30th. So now we know the red flags, we know the signs, and there are many more she talks about. I've kind of summarized them and brought up some specific anecdotal examples, but she does go into quite a few more. Let's now talk about how to return or to begin to live a life of integrity. Again, she's going to go over many of them. I'm breaking these down to the ones that really spoke to me, but also to give you a taste of what the full book offers. The first one is to simply stop lying. Quote, here's the rub. If you stop lying, you'll eventually, inevitably, violate the rules of the culture that matters to you. So when she says stop lying, she's not talking about that person, you're lying to people blatantly and hurtfully, although the lying is hurtful because it's hurting you. People aren't getting to know you. You're not being able to be honored as far as what talents you have, gifts you have, what you need to find balance. So it's lying in any respect and just being truly who you are in this world. So stop lying when responding to casual questions. When someone asks you, how are you doing? Be comfortable with expressing your exuberance about the day. Or, hey, if you're tired, say so. Not just fine or okay, just to get through the question. The passive or a default way of living is not living. It's not the way of integrity. And how we connect with others, truly connect, is to be honest. I find that our culture is more comfortable with complaining, even though America strives to be happy at all times. It is as though we must not be too happy lest someone either question what makes us happy or want our happiness, when the truth is there is not a limited supply of how to attain it. However, most Americans are too exhausted to want to figure out their own unique way to happiness. Again, this is a pushback on culture, not the people living within the culture. Admittedly, yes, a culture is made up of us people, but when we recognize that we are complicit in any culture which doesn't wish for its people to find peace and contentment, we must question it. That is an exercise in critical thinking. And how we do that is by finding our way of integrity and living it. So 1, how to get back on your path to integrity? Stop lying. 2, knuckle down for the first step of changing your life because it's going to be hard. Be prepared. The first step, the first shift you make will be the most difficult and will feel impossible on your way to your true self. But the good news is it is, quote, steepest at the start, end quote. And in even better news, because you are stepping into your integrity, let that energy be your fuel, just as it did for Dante. Now, one thing that I found incredibly intriguing about this book is that she parallels the journey of Dante through the levels of hell in Dante's Inferno, and she talks as well throughout about the entire Divine Comedy. So Dante's Inferno is part 1, and then you have Purgatory, and then you have Paradise. And as she's talking through this throughout the whole book, she parallels the whole book. Highly recommend reading it. It's not an easy read, but at the same time, it is an easy read. It's easier now as I've gotten older. But in the case with Dante, who, because he wanted to be set free, quote, so damn much, end quote, used that intense wanting to, quote, propel him forward over terrain he didn't believe he could cover. That's the part that's hard to fathom when you haven't started the journey yet, but it's true. If I can speak from my own experience, it is so true. So number 2, knuckle down for the first step of changing your life because it will be hard. But you will find the fuel if you're truly stepping into your path of integrity. Number 3, acknowledging and walking away from, quote, bad or disordered, end quote, love. She puts bad in air quotes and disordered in air quotes. So I just want to make sure we're clear on that. She says in this quote, bad or disordered love emerges when people are well-meaning but mistaken. For example, when we feel loyal to people and ideas that don't match our inner truth, end quote. So many of Beck's anecdotes are specific and clearly teach what she is introducing to readers. And on this point, she shares, quote, you might stop laughing at your coworkers' crude jokes. You may come out as gay or trans. You may start posting things on social media that shock your loved ones. You may turn into some version of Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat to a white person, end quote. In sharing these examples, she reveals how quickly our lives will change when we step away from bad love. And it happens quickly because while you've known for quite some time your truth, you haven't shared it with those you've let keep loving you in a way that serves their needs but neglects yours. Number 4, be prepared to contemplate returning to old ways, even if they weren't true to you. Okay, what do I mean by this? I found this particular portion of the book incredibly helpful. Prior to deciding to leave teaching, I chose to regularly see my counselor, and I am grateful I did. On this point, with regards to the old ways returning and maybe pulling you or trying to get you to come back to the way you used to live or the way that you're leaving, on this point, she reminded me, my counselor, that after always, and she always did this after checking in with me about how I was feeling about my decision, and at that point, I had decided I was going to write the resignation letter. It was already settled in my mind. She reminded me that there would be a mourning for the old misery, air quotes, old misery, and that, in other words, the life you know and are leaving as you head to your true self, you will at times, whether in your dreams or in different states when you are emotionally weak or exhausted. So for me, this would happen, late at night. I would wake up and my mind, I haven't gotten control of my mind yet. So I'm awake consciously, but then I start to worry, and that would happen. Now this is abated immensely since then. In fact, I haven't had any nights like that for the last month. And I'll talk more about that in a minute, but I would share this with her. And this is when you might seriously doubt the decision you're about to make. What is happening is natural, and it does subside. As I mentioned, it was pretty intense there. It wouldn't happen a lot. That's the thing. It's not going to happen constantly. It might happen more frequently than you expect, but then it will dissipate. And as I said, I'm beyond that now, but it was knowing this was going to happen that helped me navigate through it. She shares, quote, studies in psychoneuroimmunology show that if we plunge too quickly into any major change, even a good one, our bodies and minds can't absorb the shock. We must give our psychological and physiological systems time to adjust, end quote. So what's happening is natural and expected. And my counselor described it as, your brain and your being have been in a rut, so to speak. And if you've been doing it for whatever it is you're doing for a long time, so say my teaching for 20 years, that's a pretty deep rut. That's a pretty deep culture you've immersed yourself in. And so getting out of that rut without being entirely pulled back a little bit until you're entirely free of it is natural. Because it's what your body and being have become used to. It's their safe place. Now, how we give ourselves this time is where the phrase mourning the known misery comes from. And it is knowing that such a temporary state exists that we are better able to navigate through this time and into a life in which we are fully embracing our true nature. Here's a few words from Beck on this subject. Quote, if you start honoring your true self and find yourself missing your old culture, don't panic. Be kind to yourself. Allow yourself time and space to grieve. Confide in loved ones. If they don't understand, find a coach or therapist. But don't think that missing your old life means you should go back to it. Again, this section of the book was validating to me. It wasn't until I had an outside objective voice really let me reflect, really let me work through a bunch of things that I recognized my truth. Once I recognized my truth, then my family got on board. My family has been entirely supportive of this since I made the decision. But interestingly enough, it was my wavering that made it very hard for them to get on board with what I was thinking. And so I guess I'm sharing this because you might be sitting there going, my friends or close friends and family aren't getting on board with this, so I know I shouldn't do it. Well, this is the thing, and I've talked about this in other posts and episodes. If you're wavering, why would they get behind you? Now, I'm not saying that all of the non-support is people that are waiting for you to jump one way or the other. There are still going to be people potentially that'll just not get on board, and they won't get it. You got to let them go. You got to move forward. But I think maybe if you're like me in the middle, I used to think there were times where I'm like, why won't my family support this? It's because I didn't support it entirely. They're fully on board. They're excited for me. And that means the world, but it did have to be my decision. So I share that in hopes of providing some understanding. If you do have this family or friend member that is a little reluctant to get on board. Number 5, a life transformed for the better. So I've kept this one in the category of how to get back on track, because a life transformed for the better is what can you do? This is kind of going back to Jay Shetty's book, Think Like a Monk. What can you do uniquely that is within you, that is your gift to the world that you're not sharing with us? Whatever that is, it might not be something that's tangible or blatantly obvious, but just simply being yourself is a gift. Let me just say that. Just being yourself is a gift. A happy person, a contented person brings more peace to you and therefore the world. We could all use more peace in this world. And so I'm leaving it here because find your thing. Find what it is you want to give to the world, even if it just starts with being who you are because you haven't been able to be who you fully are. Start there. Here's a quote. Whatever you do to heal the world, it will replace bad health, habits, mood, etc., what Beck refers to as dark wood of air symptoms from Dante's Inferno. It's going to replace those negative aspects of your life that you're feeling or experiencing currently with purpose, with happiness, with vitality, love, abundance, and fascination that specifically match your true nature. End quote. Perhaps this all sounds too good to be true, but simply the fact that you are thinking that it is too good to be true is the hope you have unconsciously that it is possible, that you do hope that it can be true, that it can be possible, because it can. So give us your gift. Share with us you. That's the final thing on what to do to get back to the path of integrity. All right, before we get to the final section of today's episode, sharing the benefits of finding your way to integrity, I have 2 final sponsors I'd like to introduce you to. I'll be right back. Woodstock chimes. Did you know that Woodstock chimes were the first wind chimes tuned to specific notes, changing the industry forever from looks pretty and makes noise to looks pretty and sounds amazing? Founder and owner Gary Kivstad is a Grammy Award-winning professional musician, and he's known as finely tuning musical instruments played by the wind, and they have been called musical works of art. I received one of their wind chimes, and it indeed is musical. It is calming. It is music that you can bring to your garden or to your front porch or to wherever you want to simply bring a touch of music. Now, Woodstock chimes have been in business for 40 years, and they sell their wind chimes in all 50 states and around the world. The company also offers tabletop chimes, fountains, bells, sun catchers, and wind chimes that enhance lives everywhere from city apartments to country homes. A sneak peek at something coming in summer 2021, Moonlight Sonata chime, tuned to notes from the beloved piece by Beethoven. Many come with removable wing catchers for easy personalization by engravers and silk screeners, and Woodstock has a line of personalized chimes that are laser engraved with your own message prior to shipping. These are great for housewarming, wedding, sympathy gifts, and more. As a Simple Sophisticated listener, you have the opportunity to take 15% off when you go to chimes.com and use the promo code SIMPLE. Woodstock Chimes, the world's favorite wind chime. Again, take 15% off your order at chimes.com using the promo code SIMPLE. The Simple Sophisticate is also sponsored by Southern Tide. Like so many of us, you are probably ready to dress up again, but you don't want to lose that comfort that you have been enjoying and accustomed to over this past year. Southern Tide is a lifestyle apparel brand that offers the best of both worlds, comfort and style. Many of the fabrics they use also offer performance features such as sun protection and moisture management, so they can handle the outdoors as well. Speaking of outdoors, they just launched their Red, White, and Tide collection, which is ideal for your summer activities. Southern Tide also offers clothes for men, women, and kids. So if you're looking for a gift for yourself or for the upcoming Father's Day weekend, then they have you covered. And the best part is Southern Tide is offering 20% off for all Simple Sophisticate listeners. Simply use the promo code SIMPLE20. I had the opportunity to welcome home a few of their flip-flops, which I wear constantly outside, easy to slip on and slip off, and they're very comfortable as well as they look good. Be sure to visit southerntide.com and use the promo code SIMPLE20 to take 20% off your next order. Now, what are the benefits? Well, I've kind of already teased them a little bit in that last one, didn't I? So the benefits of finding your way to integrity and living it daily. Number one, a life full of meaning, enchantment, and fascination. The world needs what you uniquely can give to it. And when we find the courage to honor our nature, especially when the culture doesn't nurture it, we step forward toward a life full of meaning. And we as well become uplifted and enthralled with the awesome life we have the good fortune to live. Beck points out that thankfully, quote, nature doesn't give up without a fight, end quote. So if you are doubting that it is too late, that you've waited too long, nope, it's not, and you haven't. The mere fact that you are still contemplating, wishing, hoping, wondering is nature's strength of hanging on until you finally take action to courageously find your way of integrity. Number two, you will experience breathtaking moments beyond what the culture tells you is possible. Quote, obviously, no one will have taught you how to navigate such wonders. No worries. You'll learn fast. You were born for it. End quote. If happiness, and based on reading this book, I think more deeply it fits the definition of contentment. If contentment is something you could buy in the store and be promised a life of awe, wonder, peace, would you buy it? What if I told you it was free to buy? In other words, you're not buying it. I have a feeling some would question it, that it's too good to be true. But that is our conditioning when it comes to believing in how possible living well is and how hard it has to be. We have been conditioned to believe happiness can only be pursued, not attained. And that only so many people are capable of attaining it. So we must hurry up and chase it down, ignoring the present and constantly living in the future. But that is errant thinking. The ability to attain contentment for free is possible because it exists within us each already. It's already there. Our true nature, our true selves has always been with us. We now just need to let it speak. In other words, let ourselves speak honestly, truthfully, and the world begins to change for the better. Not only for each one of us who courageously takes this step, but for all of us as we begin to see who each of us actually is, how diverse and awesome we actually are, and how to think well without unconscious manipulation. So that's number two. Breathtaking moments are in your future. Number three, a stronger you, both physically and emotionally. As you begin to step off the wrong path and onto your way of integrity, there will be pushback. But wonderfully, you will be more capable than you might have ever imagined. Because, quote, even if the people around you raise merry hell, you find yourself coping, more than that, thriving more easily than you'd imagined, end quote. Number 4, you will discover and experience a more peaceful you. The truth about feeling drained, emotionally exhausted, is not necessarily the environment's fault that we either work or live in, but rather that we shouldn't be in that environment. We are needed someplace else. Find that and find your peace. Number 5, a life of inner harmony. True contentment, as shared on the Simply Luxurious Life many times previously, as well as on this podcast, is capable of being experienced even during the most difficult of moments and heartbreaking days and events. Why? When you've found and know what inner harmony is, an alignment of your true self, body, mind, heart, and soul, you tend to what you have control over and acknowledge what you don't. You are living a life of truth in your actions, words, and thoughts, and you are strengthened knowing how to navigate forward well, modeling, and when applicable, and you are capable, nurturing those around you forward as well, with kindness and compassion. Number 6 is you find the people who get you. Quote, if you don't walk your true path, you don't find your true people, end quote. Sounds so simple, and it really is. While I have met so many amazing people during my years as a teacher, whether the staff and colleagues I have been incredibly fortunate and privileged to work alongside, the many, many parents whose love and tireless efforts to raise children in a world that is ever changing, and especially the awesome students who, through their natural strengths and honed skills, learning from struggles and finding truths along the way, my connection has been professional as I kept, for the most part, my writing life compartmentalized from my teaching life. Once I finally began talking about what I love about blogging and the writing that I'm stepping fully into beginning in March, and this was just this past spring, so not that long ago, maybe 1, 2 at the most people over the last couple of years knew already what I was beginning to share fully with everyone else about how much I love what I get to do and have the opportunity to step into. A burden on my shoulders was lifted and I felt free. Some don't understand what I'm stepping fully into, and our relationships, even though respectfully collegial, have lessened. But to others, we've had even more honest conversations than we have ever had. And this is just the beginning. Quote, we simply can't chart a course to happiness by linking up with others who are as lost as we are. The path to true love, true anything, is the way of integrity. And what she's talking about here, and she goes into more detail prior to sharing this quote, is that either you're in a culture where the people are just as dedicated as you are, or if you have not found the way of integrity, you're obviously not where you should be or need to be to give your full gifts. There are clearly going to be other people like that. So how are you going to connect with people that are not sincerely present? And if you're not sincerely present, you can't connect to those people that are. In order to fully and deeply connect with others, we must be our true selves. No holding back, no editing, no hoping they like us. It doesn't matter if everyone gets us, so long as we let ourselves be set free. And that is what draws others of similar understanding, and those who can see our honest and raw expression and who appreciate such strength. That's what they'll be drawn to. And those are the people you want to connect with. Those are the people with whom healthy, loving relationships spring from. The 7th benefit is balance. Yes, balance is possible, although our culture would have us believe otherwise, believing it is a skill to master well, being constantly thrown from side to side, stressor to next stressor. Don't buy into this myth. In the Divine Comedy, Virgil writes something that, quote, stuns Dante. All these sins are actually based in love. Sloth, greed, gluttony, and lust are simply unbalanced relationships with rest, abundance, nourishment, and sex. We can err by either compulsively indulging or rigidly repressing our natural relationship with these things. This lack of balance doesn't come when we allow union with our true nature, but when we split ourselves away from it. It's misguided thinking, not natural behavior, that causes us to stray from our innocence, end quote. And I bolded that quote because I think it's important to read. Because again, making sure we think for ourselves is so vitally important. Now she speaks of innocence there, that quote, the last word is innocence. Our innocence is our true self. Our true self is found and experienced when we step into the way of integrity, bravely doing so, courageously striding, becoming ever more stronger and exhilarated with each step. Number 8, the final benefit I want to share with you today, that you will fulfill your long-term heart's desires. For this last point in today's episode, I'll leave you entirely with Beck's words as she reflects on her own life journey and teaches us one of the grandest benefits of finding our own way of integrity, embracing your true self. Quote, as this internal shift occurred, life seemed to deliver more and more of the things I'd longed for during my life. I began to imagine that the universe works like this. Whenever we humans long for something, the powers that be immediately send it. But everything we've ordered is always delivered to our real home address, peace. This is why we struggle for things in a state of desperation. They don't come to us. Nothing works when it's misaligned. But when we return to a state of peace, the things we've ordered can finally reach us. End quote. The way of integrity for your life is a path through and with life that makes you excited simply to envision it for a moment. You may breathe a sigh of relief and a smile creeps upon your face spontaneously each time you dare to think what you imagine could be your real life. I have been so incredibly excited to share today's episode with you because while my last day of teaching doesn't occur for another 2 weeks, so the next time that we have our next episode, 308, I will have wrapped up my teaching career. The announcement has been made. The reality has been put in place for 3 months now, 3+ months now. And a peace not yet known until now is already being felt. And I will share based on what we talked about earlier in today's episode. Yes, there are moments of mourning the known misery that creep up, but there are fewer and fewer. And now I know immediately where they stem from and how to navigate respectfully through those feelings. And thus they have become less and less and less. Living simply luxuriously doesn't just happen, and it indeed does take time. When we learn the skills necessary for living a life of true contentment, we can then begin to build what will be unique to each of us. The foundation of a fulfilling, joy-filled life is to realign yourself with your true self. To conclude with more sagacity from Martha Beck on making our way to integrity, quote, not because this path is virtuous, but because it aligns with reality, with truth. Your life will work for the same reason a well-built plane will fly. Not a reward for good behavior, just physics, end quote. Logical and simultaneously honoring the full humanity of each and every one of us. Now, if you want to go back to the show notes and find any of those quotes, link to the book, look at that list, all 3 lists, I should say. You can find the show notes at thesimplyluxuriouslife.com/podcast 307. And the book again is called The Way of Integrity, Finding the Path to Your True Self. If you too are feeling stuck or purposeless or confused or just struggling and something doesn't feel right, just intuitively you know it, or if something bigger, you have been ready, you want to reveal your true self in a way that you know you need to, but you're struggling with how to do it or if you should, this is a book I highly recommend. Highly recommend. All right, I'll be back in just a bit with this week's Petit Plaisir. This week's petit plaisir will come as no surprise if you're a Francophile. Lupin. Lupin, Lupin, is the gentleman caper drama series on Netflix that is now the most watched non-English series on Netflix. And it debuted in early January 2021. And I mentioned it in a weekly this and that, but I've been waiting to share it as a petit plaisir with this episode because I knew the second part of season 1 was going to come out in the summer. So, as many of you know, if you're already a fan of the show, the second part is being released this Friday, the 11th. So I thought, what better time to talk about and recommend this series? So let me just start by saying that, wow, oh my goodness, I will admit, I initially wasn't sure I wanted to watch this series. So I watched the trailer, and I have to admit, the trailer showcased it as a great thriller. I was assuming there would be all sorts of violence in it. And it was that assumption about the violence that kept me from watching it for about 2 weeks when it eventually did debut I think it was the 8th of January. But then I started watching it. I don't know what it was that made me watch it. Actually, I think it might have been an article I read, which I linked here. But it is a classic French story told in the most unique storyline for modern viewers. And the screenwriter was adamant that the series be, quote, a violent-free series, end quote. I read that and I was sold. I was like, okay, I'm tuning in because it's set in Paris. Of course I'm watching it. And I love a good little caper. I love it. I cannot recommend it more highly. I've been telling all my fellow teachers that are asking for a different series or we exchange favorites shows to watch. I'm like, watch Lupin. Anyway, if you have not viewed the first 5 episodes of season 1, part 1, then you will have now, I think, 4 days to get caught up if you want to watch the premiere of the second part, which debuts this Friday on Netflix. There are 5 more episodes of season 1. They've broken up 10 episodes, 5 to 5. And as I mentioned, this series is already the most watched non-English series on Netflix. And before season 2 has even been released, which it will be likely in 2022, a 3rd season has already been secured. So yeah, the show has been incredibly well received. One of the many things that I like about this series is the videography of Paris, especially in and outside of the Louvre in the first part, so part 1. It's just breathtaking. And in part 2, as well as the last episode of part 1, they take viewers to the northern French coastal town of Trivets. And again, probably completely murdered that word. Caesar-winning actor Cy Omar plays the gentleman burglar, and he is just that, emphasis on the former gentleman. Cy himself compares his role as Arsène Diop in Lupin when asked by Jimmy Fallon in a press conference to the French version of James Bond. And I can absolutely see the similarities. Yet, in my opinion, Lupin takes the capers and his character to the 21st century. There's more awareness of the world and its progressiveness, far less chauvinistic, and well, let's just be honest, it's set in France, so I prefer Lupin. I highly recommend watching it with the original French language, so don't watch the dubbed English version. They do have subtitles for you, at least for me. The minute that I even just saw the trailer of the dubbed version, it just ruins the full experience of the plot and the palpable energy that's created with the intended language being French. Now, you may need to adjust your settings on Netflix to do this, but once you do it once, you don't have to do it again. And rest assured, surprise, surprise, I will be tuning in this Friday to begin watching part 2. When asked in an interview if he and the production team, so Omar Sy and the production team, knew the series would become so popular internationally, Sy shared, while of course they couldn't predict the audience's response, they felt the opportunity to present their series on Netflix, which is the Olympics of TV series, as he put it. They felt a bit of pressure because they were carrying, this is his quote, carrying the French flag, and we wanted to make sure we carried it properly. So we worked hard and we're happy and thrilled that people like it. You can learn about the series, which puts a new twist on a French classic tale, and discover the inspiration which guided the series as it came to be in 2 different articles I have linked on today's show notes. What I've done, as I mentioned in last episode 306, I have a separate post now for the Petit Plaisir. You will find the link and the mention of this series on the main show notes, but then there'll be a link to the detailed post that will share those articles that I've just mentioned. I've included both trailers for part 1 and for part 2. And since I'm just introducing the series, I will play for you part 1's trailer. Here we go.
Imaginez, vous héritez d'un trésor. Moi, c'est ce qui m'est arrivé. Quand j'étais petit, j'ai hérité d'une fortune. Un beau jour, quelqu'un est entré dans ma vie et m'a légué tout ce qu'il avait. Des richesses incroyables, des ressources inépuisables et plusieurs vies pour en profiter. J'ai hérité d'un livre qui est bien plus qu'une histoire.
Now, granted, you didn't see all the visuals because this is an audio podcast, but you have him. This is from part 1 in the Louvre. He's working as a janitor, and the first grand keeper is to steal a necklace worn by Marie Antoinette, and how all the different planning that goes on behind the scenes that is shown later on. It's just all these different pieces start to come together gradually. So fascinating, incredibly well done with regards to the writing and the acting too. So that is part 1's trailer. Now I want to just give a heads up for a spoiler. I'm going to play the trailer for part 2. So if you have not watched the series yet, skip ahead 2 minutes and 15 seconds. Here is the trailer for part 2.
Ça va trop loin, cette histoire. Pellegrini a kidnappé mon fils. Il va payer pour ça.
Vous le connaissez ?
Bah évidemment. Hassan Diop.
D'après la police, il s'agirait Hassan Diop, l'homme le plus recherché de France.
Maintenant, on disparaît.
J'aimerais beaucoup vous aider, mais j'ai peur que vous perdiez votre temps. Ça ne viendra pas.
On m'a piégé. Et je suis pas coupable.
La fondation a été volée, mais nous refusons d'être intimidés.
Vous pensez que Diop pourrait venir ?
Diop a le sens du spectacle. Et il viendra jusqu'à nous.
On peut pas se mentir. Plus de mensonges, plus de conneries. C'est parti.
Bon, c'est quoi le plan maintenant ?
Qu'est-ce que t'as voulu me dire ? Ganimard, écoute-moi bien, c'est compris ?
Ok, c'est compris.
C'est l'eau froide. La tache de café sur ton t-shirt. Ça part à l'eau froide.
I'm hot like 95 Fahrenheit on a summer night, tight spot where bodies rot. Ran straight from water drops in the streets singing. Little kids scared cops with red dots. Philosophical gangster with violent priors. Going back like black and white TVs with pliers. Leaning on broke down cars with flat tires. Flash iron on anybody trying on the blocks I'm supplying on.
On est prêt ? Place à la magie.
The thief scene.
So do be sure to begin with part 1. Again, for Francophiles, for mystery lovers, I think you'll enjoy it. Watch Lupin on Netflix, both parts, 1 is available now. Part 2 begins June 11th, with the second season coming next year. You can find all of the links on the show notes, thesimplyluxuriouslife.com/podcast307. And I hope you've enjoyed this week's Petit Plaisir, where each week ideas are shared to make the everyday all the more enjoyable. Tune in at the end of each episode where I'll recommend a book, a film, a show, a recipe, anything that is a simple pleasure to satiate your sophisticated taste. All right, I want to thank you for tuning in today. We have a new episode coming on Monday, June 21st, and may you have a wonderful start to June. Thank you for tuning in. Bonne journée. Thank you for tuning in to the Simple Sophisticate podcast, where intelligent living is paired with signature style. For more ideas and inspiration throughout the week, visit the blog, thesimplyluxuriouslife.com, or pick up my latest book, Living the Simply Luxurious Life, Making Your Everydays Extraordinary and Discovering Your Best Self, now available on Audible and wherever audiobooks are sold, as well as in paperback and ebook versions. You can also pick up my first book, Choosing the Simply Luxurious Life, A Modern Woman's Guide, which is also available in paperback, ebook, and as an audiobook as well. To stay caught up on the most recent episodes of the podcast, blog posts, the cooking show, and receive exclusive news as well as an extra dose of inspiration to jumpstart your weekend, subscribe to the Simply Luxurious Life's free weekly newsletter, which arrives in your inbox each Friday to enjoy with a hot cup of tea or cup of morning coffee. Until next Monday, I'm your host, Shannon Ables. Bonne journée!